Good evening, everybody. My name is David Murphy, Dr. Murphy, Coach Murphy. Welcome this evening to a awesome presentation. We at the moment have a small audience, which is perfect. Makes for an intimate evening to talk about a very important or heartfelt topic to a lot of us. So sometimes having a small intimate environment is better and far more meaningful. So we're gonna get going, and I'll be in charge of bringing other people in as they join Courtney. So you can just run from here. But I want to really just give a introduction to Courtney. She has I've seen this presentation before, and I'll tell you the fact that she's doing it again. I can't wait to see how much better she makes it. She comes at this work not only from a high level of intelligence and knowledge and depth of understanding, but she also comes at it from a personal perspective, and it comes out. It oozes out of her presentation in some love. So I hope you all get so much out of this presentation as I did the first time I heard it. And without further ado, let me introduce you to Courtney Edman.
Everybody, thank you for joining me tonight. I feel very privileged to be able to share my story and all that I have learned about the topic of twice exceptionality and moving from understanding to acceptance to action. And I hope that I can convey that to you. In the field of twice exceptionality, the experts tend to use the terms strengths and challenges instead of giftedness and disability when describing the characteristics of these twice exceptional students. And I think it's actually a more practical way of thinking about it, because giftedness and disabilities are broad categories, but each of them have so many faces, and some of those different disabilities are represented here, and I'm sure some of the giftedness that each of your children has may manifest itself differently. So many different faces have different ways so many of the disabilities and the giftedness have different ways of manifesting themselves in our children. So if we think about a person in terms of their strengths and their challenges instead of their giftedness and their disabilities in isolation, it actually becomes more practical because it helps inform the strategies that we can use with them. But more about that later. First, let's take a look at the strengths. Missing something and I can't figure out where it is. So someone who is gifted or 2E may have many of these strengths. It's what gives them their power. A superior vocabulary, visual learner. They might be highly creative, resourceful, insightful. They comprehend the big picture. They're questioning. They have a wide range of interests, a special talent or a consuming interest. There may be other gifts and strength. There may be other strengths that you think of when you think of your child. And as much as I would like to continue talking about the strengths of our kids because it's so important, and because it's important for our kids to focus on what they can do, people who are 2E also have and face challenges. So let's take a look at what some of those might be. Yeah. There are a lot. It was pretty overwhelming when I first saw this also. So I know my son and I faced many of these. And when I saw this list from Beverly Trail, who's one of the experts in the field of 2E, listed all in one place, it just really blew me away. It was affirming, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it was a bit overwhelming to think of how much of a challenge it can be to live in the skin that these kids live in. And sadly, I don't know if you have had the time to really look at these, many of these challenges are social emotional challenges. I mean, let's face it, having a disability is challenging, but when you add giftedness to that mix, well, let's just say it's like challenges on steroids. For some reason, if the needs of the 2E person aren't met, when the strengths and the challenges collide, it can be incredibly challenging for all involved. And it only gets more challenging the longer their strengths and their needs are not recognized and properly developed or supported. as might be for anyone who isn't getting the help that they need. But why? Why is it so hard for them? Why the explosion of challenges? Why can't they just get the help that they need? It can't be that hard, can it? From my story, you know that it can be. And maybe from your stories, you know that it can be. I mean, they have so many strengths, and with an identified disability, one would think that they should be able to get the support from an IEP, a 504, they should be able to get some accommodations. So where do things break down when it comes to so many of these challenges, and especially so many social and emotional challenges? Well, I guess it's inevitable. Sorry, I'm just trying to. I guess it's inevitable that a few people will fall through the cracks. Unfortunately, our medical system and our educational systems are just not perfect. And unfortunately, these 2E kids are some of the ones that fall through the cracks. Thankfully, Susan Baum and a team of her colleagues at the Bridges Academy, which is out in California and specializes in all things twice exceptional, developed this model. And the model uses giftedness, or their distinguishing strengths, and their complex challenges to come together to form what is 2E, which is green. And so what they assert is that the person who is 2E is neither gifted in isolation, nor do they have a disability in isolation. And so someone might look at them and think that they don't fall in line with the typical person who's gifted or the typical person who has a disability. All they see is green. And they don't know what green is. And you add to that layer of complexity the fact that there's just not one shade of green. There are many shades, as I mentioned before, of the faces of giftedness. There are many shades of the faces of the disability. And when you put them together, you get this incredible matrix of green, which makes it all the more complicated to identify these students. And without identification, it's really hard to inform how to help them. Because as we all know, without identification, you're never going to get to a place of proper strategies that can help these students find their way forward. Another framework for understanding why these students are under-identified is thinking about it in terms of their gifts masking their disabilities and their disabilities masking their gifts. And how might this manifest itself? Well, it can manifest itself in 3 different ways. First off, if the giftedness is recognized, but the disability is not recognized, teachers might see them, or other people might see them as being so gifted. They're so smart. If only they weren't so lazy and unmotivated. If only they tried harder. And on the other side, if only the disability is recognized and the giftedness or the strengths aren't recognized, teachers and other people might wonder, well, they have an IEP. They're getting the support services that they need. Why is it not working? And in fact, signs that that might be the case are that the student is disengaged because the level of work may not be meeting them at the level that they know they're capable of. The supports might be needed, but the content may not be appropriate at their level. And then there's the time when neither the giftedness nor the disability is recognized because they mask one another completely. And so simply put, they're not receiving any of the services that they need to support their giftedness, nor are they receiving the support that they need for their disability. And unfortunately, if you're not receiving the supports that you need in any of these three ways, it can lead to unsolved problems and maladaptive behaviors and lagging skills. And so a lot of times the way that a person who's not receiving the support that they need shows up is in all types of maladaptive behaviors. They might be lying, they might be depressed, they might have anxiety, they might have low self-confidence, they might be disengaged, they might avoid things, they might be angry or seem withdrawn, they might have challenges with their peers, social skill challenges, they might have low grades, or they might fail out of college. And at the far end of the spectrum, they might have substance abuse, homelessness, or criminal behavior. So, as the saying goes, it's not easy being green. But there's hope. Because we have all of these amazing contributors to society. But the question is, how do we go from the maladaptive behaviors to these famous contributors of society? Well, if you talk with most any person who is an expert in the field of 2E, you have to begin by focusing on their strengths and remembering their strengths and celebrating and encouraging and developing their strengths. Because one of the things that's true for people with 2E, and you may have heard in my own story, is that as twice exceptional learners excel in their areas of strength, they develop the resiliency that they need to persevere through the struggles of overcoming their disabilities. And that resiliency was a key piece to my story and my son's story. And so the bottom line is these kids who are twice exceptional have complex needs. They have cognitive needs. They have academic needs. They have social emotional needs. And many of those things are not met with the way that our educational and our medical systems are set up today, mostly because of under-identification. And when you add to those pieces additional factors such as asynchronous development, meaning that a child may be reading at an 8th or 9th grade level and able to engage in conversation at that same level, but they may be, in the body chronologically of a 6th grader, of a 6-year-old. Or they may be able to have verbal conversations at this higher level, but they're only able to write at the level of an 8-year-old. And so you can see that, how do I navigate the expectations for a child who has this chronological age but has this ability, and how do I work my way through that? These kids also tend to have overexcitabilities and intensities where they feel things on a deeper level. Their energy exudes throughout their body, and sometimes that's not necessarily socially acceptable or able to be understood in a way that allows them to express themselves and their strength, because it's beyond their control many times. It's just a part of who they are. And so what is required, in fact, to support the needs of these students is a comprehensive team of professionals. And we, as parents, need the support of one another too. The bottom line is, our parenting journey is so different from the parenting journey of people of neurotypical children. There's a book that's written by a wonderful parent educator who's created a movement for people who have children for parents of children who are twice exceptional. And she refers to these children as differently wired, and that's the title of her book. Her name is Debbie Raber. And the movement that she's creating is called Tilt Parenting. But this comprehensive team, so what does it look like? Well, of course, the child is at the center of it. The parent is at the center of it. but there are so many other people who are involved and need to be involved. Not all at the same time necessarily, but certainly at different stages, different professionals are going to be needed at the same time to collaborate, to guide the treatment and the support that this student with complex needs requires. And so that comprehensive team will work to first and foremost identify what is at the root of this child. Where are their strengths? Where are their challenges? And then the comprehensive plan can be developed and implemented. It has to be dually differentiated, meaning it has to develop the strengths and it has to provide support for the challenges, and it has to take into consideration the whole child. And so I created a model after having read a number of resources on the on twice exceptionality and all of the different components to the comprehensive plan. So I created this model that incorporates a number of those components. And so this model is my Barstool for 2E growth and success. And the 5 components that I have included in this are to create safe and trusting relationships, to promote and strengthen interpersonal skills, to identify, develop, and nurture their strengths and their talents, to identify and support their disabilities and their cognitive, their academic challenges, and their lagging skills, and finally, to foster and strengthen their interpersonal skills. So let's dive into each of these components a little bit more. Well, I should say, if one of these, first of all, if one of these components is missing, this is what happens. It crumbles. The student falls. The student feels frustrated. The student gets lost again. And rebuilding has to continue. And that's where that piece of resiliency comes in again and again, for both you as the parent, but also for the child. They want, as Ross Greene has said, kids do well if they can. And so through no fault of their own, if one of these pieces is missing, the bar stool falls. That's not to say it's going to fall completely, but it will not be strong enough to sustain that growth and success at the seat of the bar stool that we all are shooting to have. But let's go back and then we'll explore all of these different components. So the first and one of the most critical components, in addition to focusing on fostering strengths and developing strengths, is to establish that safe and trusting relationship. And that safe and trusting relationship has to be present in all relationships that the child has. The child has to feel safe to not be judged, has to feel that they can trust the people that they're working with. And at times, I know this was true in my case, at times to establish that safe and trusting relationship between the parent and the child requires the support of a third party, a coach, a therapist. It could be a teacher, but most often I think that it's typically a coach or a therapist. And a lot of times what has to happen in that parent-child dynamic is there has to be, the parent has to transition into the child has to mentally transition to perceive the parent as the #1 cheerleader. And sometimes it's hard for them to experience me, as the #1 cheerleader if we're always saying, Johnny, did you do this? Johnny, did you get your homework done? Johnny, did you take out the trash? Susie, did you do this? Did you do that? And so it becomes important for us to find a way through outside support to help the child see us as that primary cheerleader, that number one fan, that person who notices and validates them for their strengths, that meets them where they are, and they know that even once that safety and trust is established, then you can ask them questions about things because they know it's coming from a safe place and a trustworthy space. I hope that makes sense. This is the part where you may have more questions, so feel free to ask if you have them. So the second part is strengthening intrapersonal skills. So this is about helping the child to develop self-awareness, to help them be able to, know what their strengths are, to help them, foster self-esteem because of those strengths, because they have an inherent worth, but B, they do have strengths. So many times in our world, it's a deficit-focused world, right? So in our medical system, in our school system, we're focused on solving problems. We're looking at lagging skills, right? There are not as many places, and in particular in Massachusetts, where gifted education is not a state mandate, there are not as many places where kids are celebrated for their strengths academically and cognitively. So it's important that they develop a self-awareness around what their strengths are. It's equally as important for them to develop self-awareness around what their challenges are, so that they can begin to ask for help, so that they can get over the tendency that many of them have of perfectionism, their fear of failure, that if I ask for help, it's a sign that I'm, once again, incapable, right? And so that self-awareness and that self-esteem is an important step to help them strengthen. And so I've talked about this one before, and it's the developing talents and nurturing strengths. And this falls into the previous one also. I think there's a common theme that is woven through all things twice exceptional, and that is that their strengths are not identified often enough. And so I say in here, like, teach to their intellectual readiness, to their zone of proximal development. Like, what are they ready for? What are they ready to learn? Let's forget about where they are chronologically. Maybe they're in 3rd grade, maybe they're in 4th grade, but maybe they're ready, like I mentioned before, to be reading at a 9th grade level. How can we meet them where they are and not dummy it down to the level that they have been beyond for many years? An example of this might be also beyond reading, might be related to music, for example. So maybe you have an 8-year-old that plays the violin and is ready for a community orchestra, not just ready to start learning how to play the violin. So finding those opportunities that are out there to be a creative problem solver, to open up the doors of opportunity so that these strengths can be nurtured, can be recognized, can be developed. There are associations for gifted education in most states, including Massachusetts. It's called the acronym of MAGE, Massachusetts Association for Gifted Education, and they can be a tremendous resource for opportunities that are relevant to your child's gifts, asynchronous development, and just being able to think outside the box of how can I meet my students' needs, no matter what their age is. Sometimes, in fact, one thing that I learned is that community colleges offer learning opportunities and classes for students, even if they're in middle school, as long as they can show mastery of certain content levels. So that's another good example. And so the 4th component is identifying and supporting their disabilities, their cognitive and academic challenges, and their lagging skills. So this is one that most of the time we as a society are pretty good at for these kids, right? Like, we have required special education services. We have, accommodations that can be identified in 504 plans. One of the big challenges for this group of kids, however, is, as you recall, their gifts can mask their disabilities. So many times, even though we as a society are good at providing eligibility for special education, these kids fall through the cracks because they don't necessarily show enough of a lagging academic skill to meet the criteria for demonstrating that they are not making effective progress. And so they don't get the explicit instruction that they need in order to meet their needs at where they could be. So cognitively and academically, they could be performing with peers, with academic peers up here, but they can't because they're not receiving the explicit instruction in whatever it is that they have a disability in. And so, as you might imagine, they are many times they are very self-aware that they are not performing at the level that they could be. And that just continues to feed into that cycle of social emotional challenges. And so I wish I had good answers about how to demonstrate that they're not necessarily making effective progress where they could be, because that's not necessarily in the language of special education. That is something that I would like to dive into to find a way to advocate for these kids who aren't making effective progress that they could be making if they were given what they needed along the way. That makes sense? And so the fifth component is helping the student to develop appropriate social skills to alleviate the challenges that they might have with their peers, with social isolation, and to help them develop self-advocacy skills. So it's one thing to be self-aware, it's another to share that awareness with someone else. It's one thing to be taught the social skills, and it's another to have a conversation with someone using those social skills, putting those skills to use. So it's important for us to provide opportunities for these kids who are gifted, who are already sometimes a little bit quirky, and who may have had social challenges throughout their life. They have that asynchronous development. So they might not know how to communicate, how to have a conversation with their peers when they want to have conversations about how to solve climate change, and they have peers that are wondering what game they're going to play during recess. So you can imagine, like, finding like-minded peers can be challenging for them. But MAGE, the Massachusetts Association for Gifted Education, can help find those peers. But in the meantime, they want to be playing on the playground sometimes too, and they are in class with these people that they are going to be peers with. So supporting those social skills and fostering and strengthening those skills when they're younger, but also it gets even more important as they get closer to adulthood, so that they can start to represent themselves, seek the help that they need, and advocate for themselves in the world, both in the academic world, but also in the workplace. And so I think that if, it's not easy, right? These are a lot of things, and this is what is in part makes the challenge of parenting someone who is twice exceptional so difficult. It's complex, and there's no denying that. But the good news is that there are resources out there, and there is hope that can be had, that these kids can have a bright future. And I love these two quotes on this slide, that we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. And I think that our kids, go through so many metamorphize, or I can't think of the correct verb right now, but they go through so much of a metamorphosis throughout their lives, continually, as they are working to uncover their strengths, understand themselves, unmask themselves, and they're hearing messages from society that challenges those understandings that they have of themselves. And so I think the more that we can get the message out that these kids who are twice exceptional have so many gifts, and we can celebrate those gifts, and we can kind of provide the scaffolding to recognizing their gifts and allowing them to develop and flourish in those gifts while simultaneously giving them the support that they need. They can do things that can really change the world, right? And so no matter where you are in your journey or where your child is in his or her journey, I really encourage you to embrace and share with them that you can't change the beginning, but you can start where you are and you can change the ending. And I just wanted to share this slide one more time because I think it's inspirational to remember that our kiddos are in really good company. And while they may not be famous, although they might be, we never know, they may not be famous, they can, in and of their own right, be truly exceptional. And so I thank you very much. These are some suggested resources that I've discovered in my learning about everything twice exceptional. So as you can see, there are so many resources out there to help us in our own journeys and to help me as a coach in the journey of supporting people who are twice exceptional. And those are my references for this particular presentation. And I just am happy to entertain any questions that you might have at this time.